Welcome to A Voice and Beyond. We have a very special guest today, all the way from Sydney. So wonderful to have a fellow Australian on the show. We have Dr. Belinda McMahon. How are you, Belinda?
I am fabulous. Thank you, Marissa. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's such a joy. You and I have hung out in the past. We were both on National Council for ANATs for quite some time, where you were the treasurer. So you had the joy of dealing with all the figures, and I was the secretary. So
Mm,
we were both on like the actual committee, we were on the board. It was pretty full on, but we
yeah.
choose to forget about those days now, I think. We're
Oh,
both
look, that's right.
traumatized.
That's right. Great work, but exhausting work.
Yes, yes.
Mm,
But on the upside, I got to meet you. We've attended events together. We've had quite a few laughs in the past, and I'm sure we're going to have a few today because I've already had a disaster before interviewing you. For our listeners, prior to coming to this interview, I had to cut myself out of a pair of shorts because the zipper broke. I couldn't get it up or down. So I've already had to cut myself out of a pair of pants. So goodness knows what else is going to happen. But whatever, you are in for a treat today with Belinda here. Belinda, you're a voice teacher. You hold a PhD from Macquarie University in Sydney, where you studied vocal identity. And this has led you on to creating your own brand, your own business, which is called VoicePrint Professionals. So let's start with another traumatic event, aside from being on committee with ANHAS, and that is doing a PhD, which
oh,
totally empathize with. So
yes.
tell us what inspired you to go and study vocal identity. What was all of that about?
Mm. That's a great question. It was quite a journey, I think. Look, before I went into research and before I went into teaching, I was a performer. And I performed professionally for over a decade. And I think, as a lot of us, I'd been taught, be flexible, be versatile, be able to do whatever you need to do. And so I did that very well. Whatever people needed me to do, I could do for people. And I actually went down the line of for a long time, I had a successful Bette Midler tribute show. And it was a
Love
cabaret and
Bet.
corporate. Yes, oh, she is fabulous. She
Love
is
Bet.
fabulous,
Yes.
and that was good fun, and that went for over 5 years, and it was successful and great fun to do. But I always knew there was something missing throughout that entire journey, and retrospectively, what I think it was that it was always filling what other people needed me to be doing, and it was never really actually discovering who I was as a performer. So sort of fast forward, I stopped performing. I had a couple of kids, and then I was working actually at Macquarie University, and I was teaching vocal studies. And I would sit back and watch these, university students performing, doing their final, assessments and performances. And some of these, for want of a better word, kids,
Yes.
young adults, 20-year
Yes.
olds, 21-year olds, 18-year olds, just sometimes they just really captured this fabulous essence of who they were in their performances. They just really captured themselves. And but other students seem to be in a little bit of a struggle with figuring out exactly what their voice was or who they were as a performer, and what to do. And it just made me question, where does this come from? How do we learn
Mm.
how to be ourselves? How do we discover our vocal identity, our or our and that's sort of a part of a singer identity? And and are we impacted by how we're taught, by who we learn from, and all of our experiences? And I'd already done one research project, which was my honors project, which was in vocal constriction. And in that research project, it had come up that often mimicking or trying to create a voice that wasn't really yours was
Mhm.
one of the big causes of vocal constriction. So
Absolutely.
yeah, I guess this led, it sort of flowed on from my previous research, combined with these observations of what I was seeing in performers and my own experiences, where I was like, well, I don't know if I worked successfully for, as I said, well over a decade, but did I ever really actually tap into who I was? Who was I as a singer and a performer, and
Mm.
what was my vocal sound, or what is my organic vocal sound? So yeah, that's where the idea and the topic came from.
That's really interesting. And I can see where you would have run into strife, not only as a cover singer, because I was covering other artists for years, being in a band, whether it was a rock band or whether I was singing in a piano bar, you're always covering other people's music. But especially if you're doing a tribute show, audiences would want you to be as close to that artist as possible. So if you're
Mm.
doing Bette Midler, Belinda would have had to leave the room before getting on stage, and you would have had to totally like not only just vocally but physically in some way capture the essence of who that person was.
It was a completely embodied experience.
Yes.
And I would actually say, like, I couldn't even rehearse effectively in that character if I didn't wear the right shoes. It was very interesting. Like, I had these particular heels that I'd wear for performing, and I needed to be in those, and it was the outfit, and oh look, it was the hair, the makeup, the eyelashes, it was everything. But I remember a journalist asking me once when I was doing an interview if it was hard to get into the character. And I said, oh, no, not really. I've had my process for getting into that character. It would be the curling of the hair and the getting ready. And that
Mm-hmm.
it actually happened quite naturally through that
Mm-hmm.
process. I said, what is hard is actually getting out of the character afterwards. You end up embodying that character so much, and becoming that person, that I would find sometimes little triggers in life that I would slip back into that
you'd
character.
you'd become Bet
Yeah.
in
That's
real
what it
life.
feels like.
Oh
That's what it would feel like to me. It's like you'd slip back in. There'd be triggers because, as I said, there were distinct triggers for me, such as the shoes and the way I did my hair and particular makeup things, and even the mannerisms. Certain lines, like for instance,
come on, you have to give us
oh,
one.
well, I have to remember, you have to bear with me here. This is going back a long time. Let's see, my eldest son is 15 and a half. I was pregnant with him when I stopped performing. So performing the show. So it's going back a while now. But when Bette Midler did Sophie Tucker, do you know how Bette Midler had all the Sophie Tucker was like a vaudeville performer. So Bette Midler used to do Sophie Tucker, and Sophie Tucker did all those sort of raunchy, bawdy jokes, and the audience would love them. And I must admit, it was one of my favorite bits of the show, doing these Sophie Tucker jokes. But a lot of them had in it this line, I never forget it, It's like, oh, I never forget it. And that was Bette Midler doing Sophie Tucker. And then
Uh-huh.
it became me being Bette Midler doing Sophie Tucker. So all a bit of a crazy circle. But if I ever say now, oh, I'll never forget it, it always will still nearly, oh, just a
Trigger.
bit of an expression. It'll trigger,
Yes.
I'll never forget it, I was, and I hear the vamping going on in my head that I used to have going, the vamp was, the jokes were happening. It's very funny, but it really is an indication of what it's like to really embody a character.
Yes.
And I think all actors and performers understand that. They've been through that and they understand what it's like to become somebody else. But when that, for me, well, that went on for 5 years, but that even flowed out of already being a fairly versatile performer that did so many different things. It's like, who was I as a performer?
Mm,
What was my voice
mm,
in that? It was
mm.
all very confusing.
Yeah, and you would have wanted to make sure you had your teeth in when you said Sophie Tucker as well. You wouldn't want to say that without any front teeth.
No, that's right. Oh, look, I tell you what, if you want a good laugh, some of the jokes that Bette Midler used to do, they were great fun. Look, it was a great fun show to do.
Yes,
So,
yes.
and I really was very blessed and honored to be able to do that for so long. But and for me, that flowed on from previously being a classically trained singer that did my MRSA in classical singing, and then did all this other, sort of, I guess you just move so much.
And you
That I
know
never
what,
really explored.
Belinda, that is a whole other conversation.
It
That is a whole other discussion. But I'd be interested to hear, what did you learn from that research?
Oh, look, the biggest things that came out of the research, and obviously there's a lot, as you know, PhD
Yes,
is
yes,
hefty research, but the biggest things that hit me were the influences and the influencers on our vocal sound. So I was
right.
looking for the influencers and influencers in particular on vocal sound and how that, formed our vocal identity. And it was the holistic nature of these things that really struck me. It was the fact that it was the music that was played in our household as we were young children. It was the passing comments made by our teachers at primary school or music or in high school or in musical groups. It was the choirs that we either were in or weren't in or didn't get into. It was the roles in musicals that we were given or weren't given because they weren't for us. They didn't suit our voice.
Mm-hmm.
It was all of these things. As I said, it was the support given within the family. It was all of these sort of experiences that may sometimes seem passing or fleeting that were coming up for for people who were submitting my questionnaire and being interviewed. These might have been experiences from 10, 20, even 30 years before, or longer, even 40 years before.
Yes.
But these were the things that were still standing out in their mind.
Mm.
And these were the things that then were shaping what they did. I started focusing on becoming a jazz singer because my music teacher at high school said I was really good at jazz, but I wasn't very good at musical theatre. So therefore I focused in on this. And then as a result, then they found a teacher that specialized in jazz. And then from there, they started working in that era, that area. I mean, that's just an example that I'm providing there.
Yes,
But
yes.
it's these first things that occurred, these first experiences, or things that happen in their lives that then have led to the decisions that they have made, subsequent decisions over many years that have created this identity that they have with their voice. So I relate it to our own identity. Our identities are constructed largely by our belief systems, who we are told we are, what we are told we can do, what we are told we can't do, and often at very early stages of our lives. And we then construct a belief system based on that. And as a result, our actions then result from what we believe we can and can't do. And so therefore we create that as our identity. So a lot of my initial research started looking into identity research to start off with. And so I guess, we have our identity, and then we can branch into, say, musician identity, and then we can have singer identity. And actually, as one of my examiners actually wrote, they said that vocal identity is like a niche area in the middle of these other areas of identity.
So interesting. You know what breaks my heart in amongst all of that is, what about the music that brings you the joy? At what point of time do people consider that when it comes to their vocal identity? Like people are being told you're a good jazz singer, or you should study classical, you should do this, you can't sing. a lot of teenagers, when they're going through puberty, are told that they can't sing or they're terrible singers when they're just going through puberty and they're going through a voice change, be it female or male. And a lot of students that age do sound not their best. But what about the joy? I mean, that's where I figure I was really lucky, is that I pursued the music that I had so much love for. And
Yes.
no matter, and thankfully, when I auditioned for the choir, I was told no. I was not allowed in my high school choir because I was told I was too loud, because I was singing pop and rock at home and I didn't have a lovely head voice or M2 sound, like voice, whatever you want to call it. So for me, the joy, no matter anyone telling me I couldn't sing this music, was not going to stop me from singing it, because I just loved it so much.
Yeah, and I think that's fabulous. And look, don't get me wrong, I do think that the music people were interested in definitely shaped the way their voice developed as well, because as you say, it does mean that they lent into singing along with these particular artists, listening to these artists, and mimicry becomes a big thing there.
Oh, that's how we learn, isn't
How
it?
we learn, exactly. And I, in my findings, I broke it down into two things. There was intentional imitation, which was, you know, when we are intentionally imitating to, say, for instance, experience how to do a riff or a run or something, or a particular sound that we're really enjoying hearing, and we try and imitate it to learn. So as you just said, a learning process through imitation. And then there's the unintentional imitation that can occur that we are not necessarily also always so consciously aware of in the moment. So I think the students' interest in music would definitely drive it. I think the family's interest in music. So often
Yes.
people would comment on the love of music they had because of great childhood memories listening to a particular style. And then that therefore resulted in a great enjoyment in themselves singing that music because of those early memories from listening to that music. Now, obviously, I realized I should just specify that some elements of the voice and our vocal identity, so our vocal sound, are, you know, due to our individual morphology. So, as you know, the particular
Genetics.
size of our genetics, the size of our vocal folds, the length and shape of our neck, our resonance cavities, our you know, all of that. There's some of those elements that are obviously the
Yes.
bits that are out of our control. So there's some of that, but due to things such as growth, the malleability of our voice and our vocal sound. And as singing teachers, we understand how malleable, with the right tools and techniques, our sounds can be exceptionally malleable. We may still have an essence of us in the sound. We have an essence of our voice and our personality, but through changes in resonance and you know, and just all the way we're using the voice, different techniques that we learn and we train, we can really we can create quite different sounds. So there's a lot of malleability within the instrument. And then we obviously also have growth, hormonal changes, as you've already mentioned. We have growth, but we also have hormonal changes later in life.
Yes. And that was an experience vocally for me. Yes.
Yeah, that's right. So we have that. We have vocal health issues and concerns that can come and go and can influence us. So in actual fact, our sound is not nearly as fixed as we potentially think it is. Now, what was really interesting to me is that I went into this research as a heavily trained singer. I had been trained since, well, in those days, what was considered a young age. I think I started around 12 or 13, which in those days was really quite young to start lessons in Australia anyway. And then, as I said, I trained classically, did my MSA, but I always performed in contemporary musical theatre style. So I guess I always did a mix. Yes, and my teacher was always about flexibility. She was always about the fact that you can do multiple different things. So I was actually performing professionally as a contemporary singer just at a young age. I was like 20 or something when I was doing my A Marseille classically. So I did the two at the time. And so, but heavily trained and heavily influenced by my teacher, because I had a very close relationship with my teacher for a long time. And then I was a teacher. So when I embarked on that research, I would have to say, in all honesty, I think actually my initial research question, because as you would know, your research question evolves as
It
you go.
evolves, yes.
It evolves. That's right. So I think my very initial research question was something about the impact of pedagogy and, pedagogical techniques on the development of vocal identity. And as it evolved and went on, we realized that was a bit limiting, and we opened it up so much further. And I'm so glad we did, because I would say that the teacher and vocal techniques still were important, absolutely still important, but I'd nearly say they came through like a second tier level, because it really depended on these first experiences that occurred in their lives and these first connections with music and singing and their belief systems that developed, etc., that then led to whether they went to a teacher or not, and then which teacher that they went to, and what techniques and everything worked for them then. So it was interesting.
Yes. Couple of questions around that. And as voice teachers, now, how do voice teachers avoid imposing their biases on a voice, even though you're saying it doesn't, it's a second tier influence? However, I had a conversation with a student who is also a young singing teacher. She is in early stages of teaching, and she came in vocally fatigued a few weeks ago and told me that she's doing all this singing teaching for a studio, for a music school somewhere. And I said to her, how much singing are you doing in the lesson? Oh, I do all the exercises. I show them how to do stuff in the lesson. And I said, this is just my opinion, and I'd like for you to give your opinion on this. I said, we learn through mimicking. I said, have you noticed how I really don't sing? I sing very little in a lesson. And she stopped and thought about it. She'd had me for 3 years at a university level. And she said, yeah, you hardly ever sing. I said, yeah, because I don't want a cohort of students leaving here sounding like me. Because I've heard other singing teachers who are like helicopter teachers that their students all sound like them. So I think we actually do have quite a deal of influence on, or we can have, on our students. And I suppose some of that would be dependent on their age. If they haven't established their own vocal identity as yet, they may take on that of their teacher as someone who is role modeling. So how do we as voice teachers ensure that we're not imposing an identity on our students, either by making a sound and telling the student this is what it needs to sound like, or because we have our own biases?
Absolutely. I actually couldn't agree more, Marissa. And whilst, as I said, it's sort of a second tier influence, I do think it's still a significant influence. And that is largely due to exactly what you just said, that unintentional imitation.
Yes.
Yeah, and that definitely came through. And so I do think as teachers, we can sometimes have a lot of influence on the sound that the students make without us even intending for that to happen. So I could say, in actual fact, since completing my research, I think my entire teaching practice has changed.
I was going
Um,
to ask you, how has
mm,
it changed? So that's
uh,
another
uh, I,
question.
I would nearly say entirely, entirely, and that's not to say that I think I was doing wrong things before that. I still have connections with students of mine from 20 years ago, and they still are very appreciative for what I did with them. So I'm not saying that,
Yeah,
you know
you didn't
what it's like.
hurt.
As teachers, we
Yeah,
evolve.
yeah, you didn't
Yes.
hurt anybody. That's what I say in my about my early teaching days. I didn't harm anybody.
No, no, I most certainly hope I didn't do that. And people, a lot of them are music teachers themselves now and doing very well. But I think now I, number one, take a much more holistic approach in any
Yes.
lesson,
Hmm.
much more holistic. I am far more aware of, I'm far more aware of the words I use
I was
and
going
how
to, yeah, 100%. Our language.
our language, very aware of the words I use.
Hmm.
And this is in relation to what we'll be talking about later in terms of tone of voice and speaking voice. I am really aware of the tone of voice that I'm using when I'm working with students and how that can be impacting them so that I can be building that bond. So I am now far more focused on creating a very safe space.
Yes.
And look, I like to think that I always did this, but I guess it's just my intention is very focused on this now.
Yes.
Um, yes, it is. It is. I very much focus on creating a safe space rather, where students feel comfortable to explore their vocal sound and discover what's working for their voice and for their age and stage. And as we're dealing with all different ages and stages all the time, we're also dealing with very different personalities all the time.
Mm.
Um, and so I have shifted. Look, I probably have shifted from modeling. And I'd say this is probably the biggest shift I've made is that I think previously I did do a lot more modeling, vocal modeling, so demonstration of exercises. Um, whereas now I like to instead I make sure everyone has an understanding of the voice science as it's relevant for them at their age and
Yes.
stage, but
Yes.
a understanding of what's going on, and then we discuss how it feels, their kinesthetic awareness. How is it feeling? Where are they feeling it? Maybe listening to recordings to get that idea, get
Hmm.
that feel. In some cases, and I don't use this often, I'll be very honest, I don't use it often, but in some cases where some students might be struggling to hear different sounds or feel different things, occasionally we'll do a recording and we'll look at a spectral analysis of the sound to see if a visual representation of the voice helps them see these differences. I would preface that by saying that would probably be an older student,
Yes.
that's able to
Yes.
take that on. Obviously, that's a case by case decision. But overall, I am finding that the students, it may take them longer. Modeling is sometimes quicker, i.e., we say, do it this way, they can hear it, they can replicate it, and it might be easier. But I am finding that encouraging them to explore the feel, the sound, and all their awareness around it, and actually considering what did they want to sing? How did they want to sing it? So I'm also taking a step back in repertoire selection.
I don't
Um,
select repertoire unless the student asks me to. And
yes.
and if they choose repertoire that's not accessible in its original form, we work together to make it accessible, even if it means finding a different version of the song, even if
Mm,
it means
mm,
slowing it down, even if it means removing a bridge, even if it
mm, mm.
means improvising high notes. It's
Yes,
all of
yes.
that. How can we make this work for you? That you have a
Yeah,
win here.
yeah, and that's so important, isn't it? Because it becomes a win. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
if we sort of in our haste, and because we all know as singing teachers, sometimes we are unfortunately in a hurry. We
Yeah.
are working to the clock, and we do
Mm.
have someone else coming. And
Or
if
the
anyone else
student,
is
sorry, or the student themselves may have an audition coming up tomorrow that they've only just told you about in the
That's
last
exactly
15 minutes of the
15 minutes.
lesson.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was about to say. I'm so glad to hear it's not just my studio,
Oh,
because I feel like it's my entire life is about pivoting. It's because I think I'm going to do such and such with the student that day, and they walk in, and as you say, it's an audition the next day or a performance the next day.
yeah. Mhm,
And
mhm.
so it's so much we often have to respond and move. And it is very easy for us to go, no, you can't sing that. That's a terrible choice. I mean, we probably wouldn't use those words, but no, oh no, I don't think that's going to work. How about this? And for us to just pick something. Now, it is easier because it's faster.
Yes.
But then we need to think about what's the impact on the student. So I guess in summary, I would say the biggest shifts I have made is that I am trying to actually establish far more autonomy in my students, or, ownership of their learning, ownership of their
Great.
voice,
Yes.
ownership of what they're singing. I say I'm here for them, but I guess I'm a guide. I'm here to give them the tools. I'm here to ask the questions to help, ask the right questions to get them thinking about things.
It sounds like to me you are breaking down the pillars of the master apprentice model that came about in the 15th or 16th
Mm.
century, which is about time.
Yeah. Look, and well, I guess so. I guess so. And look, I'm finding it to be very successful with my students, and I teach students of all ages, from young through to retirees, professionals, a lot of university students, because I do work within university programs as well. Um, and so we're always meeting deadlines still. We're meeting, we have
Yes.
to have auditions, we have to have
Mhm.
repertoire ready for gigs. I have
Yeah.
professional singers in all sorts of genres. We have to be preparing students to be marked by the dreaded rubric. you know because we know that's what, if you're doing music as
Mhm.
in a subject where you get assessed, you do
Mhm.
have to be marked by a rubric.
Yes,
And
I
so
have one of
it's
those
now,
that guides my
yeah,
marking.
that's right. And we need rubrics. Rubrics are there for a
Yes.
reason, and we need them. And so we sort of have to try and encourage autonomy, ownership, individuality, and exploration, while still helping them actually be able to hit those goals. So it does take a little bit of a different approach. But I'm personally really enjoying it. I'm liking the results that I'm seeing in
Yes.
students. And as I said, this is all just being guided by my research, that the influences and influencers on people's vocal development, when these students that I'm working with, when they're later in their life, I will be one of the influencers on them. The techniques I've taught them will be one of the influences on them, but there are multiple of them. And
Mm.
so I try and position myself now in that spectrum of understanding that I am just one part of their overall development and growth.
Amazing. We're here to help them access all the sounds that they need to and want to create,
That's right.
and
Exactly.
and allow
Exactly.
them to explore who they are as individuals, and what stories are they wanting to share through their singing, and how do they want to share those stories.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And yeah, because we can listen to any number of singers who are professional singers, and you and I and the next person and the next person might all have different personal opinions
Mm-hmm.
about what we like or what we don't like.
Yes.
Um, I hope I don't want to misquote him here, but because I adore his work. Brian Gill, who I know has been a guest here
Love.
several times.
Yes,
Yes,
he's my
when I
buddy.
first, yeah, when I first stumbled upon his work, when it was when I was fortunate enough to be living in Manhattan, and I wandered on down to NYU Voice Center for this little workshop thing that was happening one evening. It's the first time I had ever seen him work, and but I distinctly remember a line, something he said, and I could be misquoting the words exactly here, so please forgive
He
me,
will
Brian.
forgive
But
you, I'm sure.
it was along the lines of, I'm not here to tell someone whether it's a good sound or a bad sound. That's not my personal opinion of whether I like it or not, is not my job. My job is to help someone be able to, do what they need to be able to do with their
Mm.
voice, and for it to be repeatable, i.e., for it to
Yes.
be in a manner that that person can then use their voice for as long as they need to and or want to.
Or want
Um,
to, yes.
and yeah, and want to. That's right. And I was like, well, that I think was a really significant, you know, thing that when I heard that, and I thought that's so true.
It
Our
is.
We can get too caught up with our own personal opinions sometimes of
Mm-hmm.
whether a sound is
Mm-hmm.
too bright, too
Mm-hmm.
twangy, a bit too
Mm-hmm.
nasal,
Yes.
too this.
Yeah. And singing teachers can be so critical and so opinionated, as we know. And it's not about us, it's about our students. And it's what they're wanting to share, what parts of them they want the world to hear, and what stories they want to tell us. And the way they may tell a story right now may be different to how they're going to tell it in 2 hours' time or in a week's
Mm,
time. It's always going to be different if they're going to be authentic, and they're singing from that
absolutely.
holistic place where the emotions and the psyche and the physicality are all involved in that process.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, Miss
Yes.
Belinda, I would love to hear about your speaking voice coaching that you're doing.
Mm.
So, how did you transition to that, and what are you up to with this new business, VoicePrint Professionals?
Yeah. Well, I would say it was towards the end of my PhD research, and after spending so much time thinking about vocal identity and how our singing voice really is a representation of who we are as a person and all our life and learning experiences. I guess that's if I was to summarize our vocal identity, that's what it is. It's a representation of our life and learning experiences and our emotional responses to those experiences.
I love that.
That's in my thesis. If you want to read all 12 chapters, you'll find it
No,
towards
she'll be
the end.
right. Give that to a
I
voice
don't
geek
blame
to read.
blame you, Marissa. But anyway, that's aside. But that basically, you know what it's like when you're doing your PhD. You get completely immersed in it. There is nothing else going on in your life
No.
except for that. You know, you're very, very immersed in it. And I guess whilst I was in that state, in that stage, it really drove me over to thinking about speaking voice. I was like, well, hang on. If our singing voice is it can tell so much about who we are and what our experiences have been, and as I said, our emotional reactions. Why isn't the speaking voice the same, or is the speaking voice the same? So once I got the PhD research all done and that all submitted, I then, crazily enough, delved back into more research in spoken voice to explore that area.
Mm.
And yeah, I guess found a whole new passion in this area about how our voice represents us and how people are reacting and responding to our sound, and why it is that people react to our vocal sound, and what information people are actually taking and skimming from our voice. And so then thinking about that, it just opened up this whole new world of thought to me about, well, you know, we're not particularly aware about this. We pay so much attention to what photo we put on LinkedIn or on Facebook, or
Mm.
you know, and the words we write, but we rarely stop and think about how much our actual voice is impacting our life and impacting others and impacting the results
And
we're achieving.
and I love that you said impacting others, but also how much it says about us. So I know when in my singing studio, the first thing I do with a student that walks in the door is I start talking to them for a couple of minutes. And I know they say, you know, we shouldn't talk to our students, you know, it should be straight down into business. However, from the moment they walk in, not only am I looking at them to see how what their uh, what their physical demeanor is that day, because that already tells you what's going on with them, but also the
Mm.
speaking voice. Before they start singing, the speaking voice, having that 5 minutes of talking to them, that also tells you so much about what their voice is going to behave like that day.
Mm. It does.
So you can start preparing yourself and knowing what direction to take that lesson in, and should you be asking further questions based on how they sound. And as singing teachers, we are so aware of voice, whether it's a speaking voice or a singing voice, and we get to know our students so very well. As soon as my student opens their mouths and says hello, I'm already on to that voice sounds different today. And
Absolutely.
and so they that can, and then even what words they're using, the language they're using, how they're describing their week tells you so much. But I'm butting into what you're talking about here, and I just want to ask a couple of things about the business before we start launching into the nitty gritty. So when someone comes to you, to your business, what is it? So do you give them an assessment? Is the program tailored to the individual? How do you work with somebody?
Yeah. Look, at the moment, I offer different options. I have some courses, or a course that I've got a shorter one and a longer one. So I guess tailored to the individual. Now, at the moment, the way I deliver courses, they're online interactive courses. So by that, I mean, there may be some pre-recorded content, but mostly I still deliver the content live.
Mhm.
It's interactive. We're asking questions and there's feedback. And I actually have to say, I have been loving the results coming from the group online, like interactive dynamic. And
Interesting.
in Yeah, and I've actually had some really positive feedback from students as part of these courses, actually feeling that their development was greater in the group environment than it possibly would have been in one-on-one or in other one-on-one situations they've been involved in, because of that group learning and that community that we have established. And that actually does link back to my research, that community and being surrounded by like-minded people was actually a real driving factor in people's engagement in singing. So it makes sense that is applied in other things. And we all know that there's a big focus on community now in a
Mm.
lot of businesses. So it's interactive and working that way. I obviously do private coaching with people as well, if that works better for some people. That works better for them, for either their needs or their time restrictions. And I always start everything though with a voice analysis, but not a big scary
Yes.
evil analysis. It's I guess it's a voice analysis to help us get an idea of where somebody's voice is at the moment, and
Hmm.
what their voice is able to do right now, and then what would they like what would they like to be able to achieve with their voice.
Okay. So it's student centered or
Absolutely,
client centered.
absolutely.
Yep.
Absolutely. Whether it's my singing teaching business or my spoken voice work, everything I do is always surrounding what that client needs and what their goals are. And as far as I'm concerned, there is no one size fits all approach to any learning. And that is because there are no rights or wrongs. Just like this, I can't tell a student, I mean, that the sound they are making when they're singing is wrong. As you would know, as we were just
No,
talking
we
about,
don't use that
we,
language. And anyone
no,
that
exactly.
does, shame.
That's right. That's right. We're not there. And so with my spoken voice work, it is the same. So as I said, I continued on researching it and sort of delving into it more and learning about why we respond. And so one thing that, just really struck me, and it makes so much sense, but I hadn't known it before, but it's our autonomic nervous system reacts to the sounds we're hearing. So even mostly it's happening on an unconscious level, but we react to the sounds that we are hearing. Now, whether those sounds are coming from something or someone. And that is why we can often instantly like someone, trust someone, feel that they have authority in a subject, think that they're trustworthy, or it could be the reverse of all
Hmm.
of those things.
Hmm.
Or we might think that somebody's very shy or very timid, or we might think they're very nervous or anxious. We are making all of these assumptions always when we hear somebody's voice, but we're often very not completely aware of it. And I actually urge you, as a little challenge, a little project, just for the next week, stop and become aware about how much you are voice reading. I refer to it as voice reading. And I think we are all doing it all the time, but
Wow.
mostly it's on an unconscious level because it is our autonomic nervous system that reacts to the sounds that we're hearing. And this comes from, it's from an evolutionary perspective that some sounds told us there was danger approaching and we are in
Mm.
trouble, and other sounds were nurturing and warm and comforting sounds. They were sounds of safety. So, as an example, an alarm that is high and piercing and it makes us feel uncomfortable. It makes us pay attention because mostly we don't like those high piercing tones. You feel them. You don't just hear them. You feel that discomfort within you often when you hear those sounds.
Yes. And it's interesting because even in music, that quite often in the background of a song, there will either be a phone ring or some sort of alarm go off that we're not even aware of, that's put into the music. And it
Really?
is there to get our attention. And it's even like Netflix when it has that boom at the start. That's intentional.
Intentional. But that's, I never knew that, Marissa, that they put phones and alarms into the back of music
Mhm,
sometimes. That
mhm.
is so
It is,
interesting. Oh, I'll have
it's
to look into that
actually,
more.
yeah, it's actually really common, but we don't even know it's there. There may be a song playing and all of a sudden it gets your attention and you may not even know that it's because
No.
there's been an alarm go off that usually would mean fire, ambulance,
Mm.
police, whatever it is, or even the alarm that we use to wake up to in the morning has been placed in the background of a song to wake us up or to get our attention or to make us listen.
That's right, exactly. So that's interesting about the songs, but that is exactly what they're there for. And now, if you look at an alarm on a spectrogram, it's a very narrow resonance frequency. It's high. It's the high harmonics or the formants. It's high. It is very narrow and piercing. Whereas if you look at running water on a spectrogram, it's got a wide resonance spectrum. It's that warm sound. It's a what we refer to often in the voice world probably as a warm tone, because it's got that wider resonance spectrum. It's got depth
Mm,
in the resonance there. And so as singers, we can understand this because we are working with resonance and how to alter resonance all the time. But as speakers, often people don't think about their resonance, they don't think about their tone. Now, voice coaching is not new. Voice coaching has been around for forever. Politicians, journalists, obviously actors, they do a lot of voice coaching and always have. But it often focuses on, say, pitch, speed, articulation. Now, those things are definitely important. They're all part of it. But what I have noticed is it often tends to just lead towards a bit of an assumption that everyone wants to just be working towards a space of, say, being a leader or being commanding or being authoritative
mm.
in that space. So I did a little bit of analysis of different voices, and I've created a model that, and this I use when I'm doing an analysis. I use this model as a guide to go where we're going. So obviously I can't show it to you, but we have your x-axis going across. So it's a graph,
Yes.
a graph with the x and a y creating 4 quadrants. And on the x-axis, I've got collaborative, so a collaborative voice tone, i.e., a vocal tone when we're wanting to really connect with somebody, engage with people, get them to trust us, build that rapport with somebody. And then at the other end of that axis, we've got authoritative. So when we're looking for someone to be that leader, more commanding, very, it's going to be more of a leader in that position. And then on the y axis, I've got at the top a voice, think energizing or motivating or activating, that type of voice. And then at the bottom of that axis, say calming, soothing, or nurturing. So in those in bottom of the axes there. Now, if all of them have got different particular vocal qualities that go with them. So going through by listening to leaders' voices, listening to voices of, say, motivational speakers, listening to voices on meditation, recordings, and as such. So listening to different things, I've sort of analysed what vocal qualities we're hearing a lot in these. Now, I would very clearly like to state at the beginning, I don't think anyone is always in any of those four
Yes.
for forever. It's like anything. It's like any sort of voice we're moving through. I would actually say that mostly we're moving through those 4 quadrants at different times of our day according to what we're doing in that moment and what we would like to do. But not everyone actually has that. Some people want to be more authoritative, but find they're a little bit stuck in maybe they're a little bit stuck in that calming, nurturing type voice, and which is, you know, a warmer tone, and, you know, more breath flow, possibly even a slight bit of breathiness in there, a slower pace. Pitch contours occurring at a slower rate, not at such a fast rate. So they may be more there. That may be their, let's say that's maybe where their natural vocal identity or vocal personality sits more.
I can think of a pedagogue already who fits into that.
Oh, really?
Yes, I'm going to name. It's fine. No, but I know someone who is very calming and very slow, and Ginevra Williams.
Oh, yes, and
Oh,
she's fabulous.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, this is not a fabulous contest, you know, like it's not
No, that's
making
right.
one bad or better or
No,
good or
and
bad.
that's exactly it.
Ginevra is a perfect example of that type of voice.
Yes,
So
that's right.
calming.
Yes, I would agree with you, absolutely. And so, and I would probably say with her too, in that if we think about the quadrants and the graphing, we've got the calming down here, and then over here we've got collaborative. And I know for people listening to this, they can't see my hand gestures, but if we say we're moving to the left of the calming, we've got that collaborative thing, and to the right it's to the authoritative. So
Which she can be also.
quadrants. Yes, exactly.
Ginevra can be.
We all can be.
Yeah, she can be so authoritative, but still have that calming.
Yes. So if we were to graph her voice, I mean, we haven't, but if we were to graph it, maybe we would find it sat somewhere in that bottom right-hand quadrant between the calming and that authoritative space. Whereas somebody else, maybe somebody who's a far more, I don't know, got a stronger volume and a bright tone, clarity, faster pace, lots of the prosody, which is prosody is in linguistics, it's a term that's used for, it's for the accents and the inflections in terms. Not, when I say accent, I don't mean
no, I know what you mean.
Accents, you know, and
yes, like very dynamic.
Very dynamic, that's right, exactly. And a lot of that, then that tends to be your energizing and motivating speakers. Now, an authoritative person has that as well, but often just slightly more controlled. So if you think there of your politician or your leader, they have very purposeful prosody and very clear intent. Whereas maybe a more motivational, energizing speaker, it might be a bit faster, and we're getting those words out, and lots of prosody, lots of emphasis, lots of volume and everything still, but it's at that different pace. And then when we're working with in a collaborative space, it's definitely a warmer tone, like what we're talking about with calming, because it's about connecting. There's still clear prosody, but not necessarily to the same point of energizing and activating somebody. And in collaborative, what can be very useful, so if you are wanting to collaborate with someone, is that you do what's called tone matching and pace matching and pitch matching. So because we like familiarity, we like things that are the same for us. So if you want to build trust with somebody, you try and use a vocal tone as much as you can, or a pitch as much as you can, with gender differences obviously, and a pace that aligns with the person that you're speaking to, so that you can bring them in. And so I did a presentation really recently at a conference that was talking about how to use your voice in sales and negotiations, and saying how you can go from using your voice in this collaborative way, you're building trust, you're building rapport, and then you can shift along this line over to authoritative when you then want to take control of that situation more and really direct that conversation and direct it to the outcome that you're wanting to go towards.
I need to talk to you. I need a session.
I'd love to, Marissa.
I need a session, honestly.
Love
I need to learn how to close the deal.
Well, and it's like it's directing, it's learning how to use your emphasis, your prosody, whatever it might be, on the particular words to steer the conversation you want it to go in. So, as an example, if I said to you, if there's a conversation about, let's say an event, and I could say, so we'll, what should I say? Let me think. Sorry, I've just got to get this clear in my head. So should we do the event in spring? Now that's should we do the event is what's mostly coming through to you. It's going to steer the conversation of, well, of course we should do the event, or no, I don't think we should do the event. Or if I go, should we do the event in spring? That emphasis is then going to direct the conversation to, well, are we going to do it in spring or in autumn? Or or wherever it might be. But so there's little ways like that you can try and fairly subtly steer a conversation in the direction of where you want it to go. What do you want me to focus on next? Do you want me to focus on the event and whether we're having it or not? Or do you want me to focus on when we're having the event?
So interesting. Yeah. So interesting. So, even just what you were saying about pitch matching and as much with the person that you're speaking to have developed that collaboration. Is that why women tend to lower their tones if they're working in a male dominant field, or they're working with CEOs, or they're presenting? Is that why women lower their pitch?
It is indeed. So research shows us that we are more likely to vote a person into power with a lower pitched voice.
Oh, is that how Joe Biden got in? What happened to our Prime Minister, Albanese? What happened? How did we end up with him?
Look, I actually have my own thoughts on that. I don't know. We probably don't have time to delve into that, but I actually do think, and I can chat with you about this another time, but I do think the whole situation with Scott Morrison and Anthony Albanese, and the way Scott Morrison's very low, strong, commanding, very authoritative voice seemed to, at the beginning of his political career and as Prime Minister, stood him well. It served him as a figure of authority, and everyone loved that. Or a lot of people, I'm not saying everyone, but, obviously people got behind him and voted him in with that and liked that. But then by the next campaign, when people were wanting him to maybe admit to some errors or acknowledge some issues, and he didn't, and he stayed very, very strong. And then he stayed with that very low, commanding, authoritative voice. I remember watching a debate, and vocally he slaughtered Anthony Albanese vocally but this is where it's interesting, and the research supports this, that sometimes a lower pitched voice at times can be seen as aggressive or arrogant.
Actually, I think those words were used about him quite often.
Yes, that's exactly right. And so and the public at the time were looking for somebody genuine and authentic. Now, Anthony Albanese's accent and sort of twang in his voice is something that really makes him individual and makes him authentic and genuine. Then so it was the two compared to each other. Now, if there were 3 or 4 people in that particular competition, maybe things would have been different. And I think this is what's really important to emphasize, is that there is no right or wrong voice use. That you can't just learn how to use your voice better in one way and use it that way forever and in all situations. As I said, this quadrant thing, that model that I have developed, is we will be moving through these different quadrants at different times according to the purpose and the situation we're in, and who we are speaking to, and what results we want to achieve in that moment. So whilst research shows that we will usually vote in the person with the lowest voice, at times that is mostly the case, but not in all situations. If that low voice in that particular situation can come across as too aggressive in comparison to the other person. And so so it's definitely not, as I said, it's definitely not just a situational, it's not definitely a one size fits all. Scott Morrison's voice worked for him at the beginning, and obviously there's more to it than just voice. Voice is only one component, but that very strong, dominant, authoritative voice then potentially was perceived differently when the situation changed and when the opponent changed, the person he was up against changed. And I think that would have only been seen if that was being analysed and monitored in the moment for that feedback to have been coming through. And I personally think that voice is something that's often hugely overlooked. We think about the words that we're saying, we think about how we dress, and as I said, we think about our photos, we think about all of those things, but we often don't think about our voice beyond knowing that we need to be clear and we need to project. We need to be heard and people need to be able to understand our words. We are taught that. And then, yes, this concept has crept in of we just need to be lower to be more authoritative. And it is true. The research does support that we do prefer a lower voice. But in regards to the pitch, though, what was interesting, there was one study done using elephants. I will say it was how elephants responded. But yes, I know.
I wasn't expecting that.
That's right. It was funny, but in that sense, we're getting their response. But they actually, because the elephants responded differently to the males, to the females, and they actually pitch changed the voices. They took the male voices higher and they took the female voices lower using software, but the elephant still responded the same way. The change of pitch didn't change the elephant's responses, or reactions. And so the thought was that it's not just pitch. And so this is the good news for women. It's not just pitch. It was also the vocal quality and the vocal tone. And often as women, we often lean more into that calming or nurturing voice, which has a bit more breath flow, maybe even a bit more breathiness, and that gentler, warmer quality to it. So, and that may be what is undermining our authority, because I do have a lot of women speak to me about the fact that they feel spoken over, they feel unheard in executive level meetings. They don't feel like they can cut through the noise of a lot of the louder men. But it isn't just pitch, which is a good thing, because we don't all want to start straining our voices by speaking too low all the time.
Exactly. And you know what? We're going to continue on this conversation, and I want to take it further by starting to talk about women.
That sounds
and then
fabulous.
We're going to segue. So we're going to cut into the next chapter. So this is chapter 1 with Belinda McMahon, and people, next week there will be chapter 2. So I look forward to that with you. This has been amazing. It's been so much fun also. You're a great sport, Belinda. So I look forward to talking to you further next week.
Thank you so much, Marissa. I look forward to it.